My parents wrote me out of their will, leaving everything to my brother. You were never good enough, they said, looking me in the eye. I didn't argue. Years later, when my brother squandered it all and they realized they had nothing left, they came to me with a proposal they thought I'd never refuse. Before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking true stories to light. Now, let's get started. They left me with nothing. Now, they need everything. You were never good enough. Those words, spoken so casually, should have cut deep. But by then, I was numb. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just stared at my parents as they sat across from me, utterly convinced that they were making the right decision. They had called me here, not for a heartfelt talk, not to reconnect, but to make it official. Everything, every single thing, was going to my older brother, Adrian. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it. Me? I got nothing. Not a cent. My mother, Evelyn, didn't even flinch when she delivered the news. My father, Richard, just nodded along like this was the most logical decision in the world. I waited for a punchline that never came. That was the moment I realized I was never part of their plan. So I got up and walked away. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I just left, and I never looked back. The golden child and the forgotten son. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. My family didn't just play favorites. They made it a lifestyle. My parents, Richard and Evelyn, had two sons. My older brother, Adrian, was the golden child, the prodigy, the one they pinned all their hopes and dreams on. And me? I was just there. At first, it was subtle. When we were kids, Adrian always got first pick, the best clothes, the biggest bedroom, the newest gadgets. I got whatever was left over. If I ever asked why, the answer was always the same. He's older. It makes sense. Even as a kid, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. As we grew up, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. Adrian could do anything, wreck the car, fail a class, get into fights. It didn't matter. They always had an excuse ready. He's just going through a rough patch. You know how hard it is being the eldest. He'll get back on track. But me? If I forgot to take out the trash, I was lazy. If I struggled with a class, I was a disappointment. If I made even the smallest mistake, it was proof that I wasn't as ambitious as Adrian. When he went to college, my parents drained their savings to cover everything. His tuition, a car, even an apartment. We're investing in his future. And when it was my turn, we can't afford to send you. Maybe try community college. I didn't argue. I took out loans. I worked multiple jobs. I figured out on my own. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough for them. You should be more like Adrian. Why aren't you as successful as your brother? That was the pattern. That was my life. Until one day, they made it official. They sat me down, looked me in the eye, and told me everything. The house, the savings, the assets was going to Adrian. You were never good enough. That should have broken me. But by then, I had nothing left to break. Walking away and never looking back, I should have felt something. Anger, sadness, betrayal. But as I sat there, staring at my parents, all I felt was nothing. Maybe that was the worst part. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I didn't try to change their minds. Because deep down, I already knew this was who they were. They had chosen their favorite son long ago. And I had spent my whole life trying to be good enough for people who never really saw me at all. So I stood up. I walked away. And I never looked back. That was the last real conversation I had with them for years. Instead, I built my own life. Without their support, without their money, without their approval, I worked harder than ever. I clawed my way up from nothing. I built a career, a future, a success they never imagined I was capable of. And as time passed, the distance between us only grew. Why would I call? Every conversation was the same. Adrian is thriving, they'd say. Why don't you reach out to him more? You should be proud of your brother. But not once did they ask about me. They didn't care about what I was doing, how I was doing. Because to them, I was just the other son. Until out of nowhere, they called. For the first time in years, they wanted to have dinner. Just the three of us. I already knew something was wrong. And oh, I was right. Their perfect son ruined everything. When my parents called me, I almost didn't answer. After all these years, why now? Why suddenly pretend to care? But curiosity got the best of me. We met at a restaurant, when I knew they couldn't afford anymore. That was my first clue. My mother, Evelyn, usually so poised, looked uneasy. My father, Richard, was quieter than I had ever seen him. Something had changed. And then, my mother cleared her throat. We've been thinking, and we have a proposal for you. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, waiting. I wasn't about to make this easy for them. Evelyn glanced at Richard, clearly expecting him to speak first. But he just stared at the table, tracing the rim of his empty glass. That was new. My father was never the quiet type. So my mother took the lead. Your brother has been struggling, she said, carefully folding her hands like she was about to deliver some noble speech. Things have been difficult for him. I stayed silent. Let her squirm. She hesitated, then pressed on. We know there's been distance between us, but we're still family. And family should support each other. There it was. I took a slow sip of my drink, just to see if she'd get impatient. She did. Richard finally spoke, his voice measured, careful. That was new, too. He was usually the type to bark orders, to lay down the law. But now, he wasn't in control. And he knew it. Adrian has made some mistakes, he admitted. I tilted my head. What kind of mistakes? Evelyn sighed, as if she were carrying some great burden. Business has been challenging. The economy has been unpredictable. And Adrian's investments. I cut her off. He lost everything, didn't he? She flinched. Richard's jaw tightened. It was an unfortunate series of events, he said, voice clipped. But the point is, he's trying to recover. He just needs a little help getting back on his feet. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. They really thought they could dress this up like it was some noble cause. Like I just nod along and agree to help. I leaned forward, my voice calm. And what does this have to do with me? My mother's lips thinned. We were hoping you could offer some support, just temporarily. I raised an eyebrow. Support? Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. You know, financially. There it was. Don't say it like that, she snapped, as if calling it what it was made it worse. Richard cleared his throat. You've done well for yourself. We know that, and we're proud of you. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. Proud. Now they were proud. Now that Adrian had burned through every last dollar. Now that the perfect son had ruined everything. Now that they needed me. I let the word hang in the air. Proud. Then I smiled. That's funny. Because I remember sitting at our kitchen table years ago while you told me I wasn't good enough. Evelyn's expression tightened. Oh, come on. That's not fair. We've always wanted the best for you. I laughed under my breath. Interesting. Because I seem to remember you leaving me with nothing while you handed Adrian everything on a silver platter. Richard's expression darkened. He hated being challenged. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Look, we don't need to rehash the past. What matters is the present. Adrian is struggling, and you thought I'd fix it. Silence. They didn't deny it. I tapped my fingers against the table, pretending to think. Let me get this straight. I leaned in, lower my voice. You gave him everything. Your savings, the house, your full support. You made sure he never had to struggle a day in his life, while I had to work for everything on my own. And now, after he's thrown it all away, you're coming to me, the son who wasn't good enough to inherit a single penny, and you want me to bail him out? Evelyn's lips thinned. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Richard's voice dropped. It's not just about Adrian. We're struggling too. And there it was. For the first time, I really looked at them. At the way my mother's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her napkin. At the way my father's suit was just slightly outdated. They weren't just asking for money for Adrian. They needed it for themselves. Their perfect son had drained them dry. And now they were desperate. I leaned back in my chair, watching them carefully. So, what's your plan? Evelyn hesitated. Well, we were thinking alone. Richard nodded, his tone carefully measured. Just until we get back on our feet. I smiled. Alone. They both nodded eagerly, as if saying it out loud would make it real. And what exactly would you be paying me back with? Silence. I tilted my head, waiting. They had nothing. They were asking for a loan they couldn't repay, expecting me to just give them the money out of some misplaced sense of obligation. And the best part? They still didn't see what was coming. I leaned forward slightly, letting the silence stretch between us. Let me get this straight, I said, voice quiet but firm. You wrote me out of your will, left me with nothing, told me to my face that I wasn't good enough. And now that your golden boy has ruined everything, you expect me to save you? Evelyn's jaw clenched. Richard straightened, eyes hard. We are still your parents. I smiled. Oh, I know. Then I set my napkin on the table and stretched my fingers, which is why I'm going to make you an offer of my own. Their expressions shifted. Hopeful, relieved. They thought they had one. They had no idea what was coming. My offer and the price they had to pay. I watched as relief flickered across their faces. They thought they had me. They thought I was going to swoop in and save them. I took my time, glancing down at the table as if I were carefully considering my words. Then I looked up, met their eyes, and said, I'll help you. Evelyn exhaled sharply, her shoulders relaxing. Richard let out a slow breath, nodding like this was all playing out exactly as he had planned. But I wasn't finished. But we need to be very clear about what help actually means. Richard frowned. We're not asking for much, just enough to get back on our feet. Oh, I know, I said smoothly. But here's the thing, I don't do handouts. And I definitely don't do favors for people who have made it crystal clear that I don't matter to them. Evelyn scoffed. That's not fair. We raised you, didn't we? We fed you, put a roof over your head. I held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. I have zero interest in hearing how I should be grateful for the bare minimum of parenting. Richard narrowed his eyes. Then what's your offer? I smiled. I'll buy the house. Evelyn blinked. What? You heard me. I folded my hands in front of me, my voice steady. You're broke. The house is your last real asset, right? Sell it to me. Richard's face darkened. That house has been in our family for generations. And yet, I said, tilting my head, you are more than willing to sign it over to Adrian without a second thought. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. I'm offering you a way out, I continued. Sell it to me, and you'll have enough to start fresh somewhere else. It won't be the lifestyle you're used to, but at least you won't be homeless. The silence between us stretched, thick with tension. We're not selling our home to our own son, Evelyn snapped. Why not? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You didn't mind cutting me out of it before. I let that hang in the air before adding. And let's be honest, you don't have many other options. Richard clenched his jaw. We could sell to someone else. I nodded, feigning interest. Sure, go ahead. But the market isn't great right now, is it? And how fast do you think you'll find a buyer? Silence. Meanwhile, I have the money right now. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They hated this. They hated the idea of handing over the house to me. They hated that they weren't in control anymore. We'll have to think about it, Evelyn said stiffly. I leaned back, unfazed. Take your time. But just so you know, my offer has an expiration date. Every day you wait, I lower the amount I'm willing to pay. Richard's eyes snapped to mine. You wouldn't. I smirked. You sure about that? And the best part? I wasn't bluffing. I knew they had no other way out. And sooner or later, they'd be back. They had no choice, and they knew it. A week passed before they called me. I let it go to voicemail. 2 days later, I got a text from Evelyn. We'd like to discuss your offer. I waited another full day before replying. Let me know when and where. I knew they hated that. They weren't used to waiting on me. They weren't used to being the ones asking for something. But they had no choice. When we met again, they looked worn down, less polished, less put together. I knew why. I had been keeping tabs on the house. They had tried to find another buyer, but the market was slow. No one was willing to pay what they were asking. Even worse, Adrian had creditors breathing down his neck. I didn't know the full details, but I had heard whispers. He had taken out loans. Loans he couldn't repay. They were drowning. And I was the only lifeline left. Richard cleared his throat as I sat down. We've considered your offer. Evelyn nodded stiffly, forcing a smile. We're willing to sell. I leaned back in my chair. Great. But the offer has changed. Evelyn stiffened. Excuse me. I shrugged. I told you. My offer goes down the longer you wait. The market isn't getting any better, and, honestly, my interest has decreased. Richard clenched his fists. That's ridiculous. You have more than enough money to buy it at the original price. I gave him a slow, knowing smile. Oh, I know. But that's not the point. I watched as realization dawned on them. This wasn't about the money. This was about power. This was about making them feel what I had felt. Powerless. Unwanted. Like their fate was no longer in their hands. Evelyn's nostrils flared, but she forced herself to stay calm. And what is your new offer? I slid a contract across the table. I'll buy the house for half of what I originally offered. Evelyn's face turned red. That's robbery. I tilted my head. It's business. They sat there, stewing in their own bitterness, hating every second of this. I could see it in the way Evelyn's fingers clenched around the pen. The way Richard's jaw was so tight, I thought he might crack a tooth. This wasn't just a sale. This was them signing away their pride. I let the silence stretch, completely at ease, because I knew how this would end. Finally, Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she hovered over the signature line. She looked up at me, desperation flickering in her eyes. Are you really going to do this to us? She whispered. I didn't blink. You already did it to me. She exhaled shakily. And then she signed. Richard was next. His signature was sharp, angry, as if pressing the pen harder would change the fact that he had lost. When he finished, he shoved the contract toward me, his eyes cold. I hope you're happy, he spat. I picked up the papers, flipping through them leisurely before tucking them into my folder. Then I met his glare with a smile. Oh, I am. And just like that, the house was mine. Poetic justice. A home for the right person. Owning the house wasn't the victory. Why did next? I didn't move in. I didn't even keep it for myself. Instead, I turned it into a rental property. And the first person I offered it to? Adrian's ex-wife. When I reached out to her, she was thrilled. Apparently, Adrian had left her in an awful financial situation. He had spent recklessly during their marriage, and when everything collapsed, he drained their joint accounts, leaving her to pick up the pieces. She had been struggling to find a stable place for herself and their kid. And now, I was offering her the very house that my parents had once so proudly gifted to Adrian. She found it deliciously poetic. She moved in almost immediately. A week after settling in, she sent me a gift, a high-end bottle of whiskey. Attached was a handwritten note that simply said, "Best landlord ever." And honestly, I had to agree. Their fall from grace. As for my parents, they had no choice but to relocate. Their new home? A much smaller place. An old, run-down rental in a neighborhood they used to look down on. No more luxury. No more status. No more comfort. Just noisy neighbors and outdated appliances. And they hated it. They complained, of course, to anyone who would listen. But the sympathy was in short supply, because by now, everyone knew exactly what had happened, and no one felt sorry for them. Adrian's karma hits hard. And Adrian? Karma had a field day with him. No more family fortune to bail him out. No more safety net. His reckless spending finally caught up with him. His credit was in ruins. He was drowning in debt. Last I heard, he was couch-hopping between friends. And those friends were quickly running out of patience. So, am I the villain? So tell me, was I wrong for making my parents sell me the house at a reduced price? Should I have been more forgiving? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed this story of karma and revenge, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.